Paranoia and delusional disorders are often confused with schizophrenia in cinema, but clinically they are not the same. Unlike schizophrenia, delusional disorders are defined by persistent, fixed beliefs, while cognitive structure, identity, and everyday functioning often remain largely intact. Based on clinical frameworks discussed in Danny Wedding and Ryan M. Niemiec's book, Movies and Mental Illness, Using Films to Understand Psychopathology, which draws on DSM-5 diagnostic criteria, this video focuses exclusively on films centered on paranoia and delusional thinking, excluding schizophrenia-based narratives. We'll examine 8 films and rank them from weaker to stronger portrayals, from 8 to 1. Number 8. Max Cohen from Pi, 1998. Darren Aronofsky's debut was shot in high-contrast black and white for $11,000, and it looks like a migraine feels. Cohen is a mathematician who believes numerical patterns govern everything: the stock market, nature, God. The film presents his obsession as both visionary and pathological, a man drilling into his own skull, searching for meaning that may not exist. Academically, the film captures the structure of paranoid thought, the relentless pattern recognition, the belief in hidden order, the sense of being pursued by forces that want to suppress the truth. What it exaggerates is the aesthetics, the pounding industrial score, the fisheye distortions, the physical deterioration. These are expressionist choices that make internal experience external. Real paranoid delusion is quieter, more bureaucratic. It doesn't announce itself with strobing lights. Still, the film understands that paranoia is a form of meaning-making, and that's where it earns its place. Number 7. Agnes White, Bug, 2006. William Friedkin cast Ashley Judd and Michael Shannon in a motel room for what becomes a 2-person descent into shared psychosis. Agnes is a woman traumatized, isolated, vulnerable. Shannon's character arrives with delusions about military experiments and aphids living under his skin. What follows is folie à deux, shared psychotic disorder where one person's delusion becomes another's reality. The film is clinically interesting because it demonstrates how paranoia spreads through intimacy, how loneliness and fear make certain minds permeable. Judd and Shannon performed scenes in long takes with minimal cuts, letting the mania build in real time. By the end, they're tearing apart the room, covering it in aluminum foil, searching for insects that don't exist. The academic criticism is valid. The progression happens too fast, the intensity too extreme. Real shared delusions develop over months, not days. And the violent climax risks teaching audiences that paranoia inevitably leads to bloodshed, which statistically it does not. But as a portrait of how 2 damaged people can construct a shared nightmare, it remains difficult to watch. Number 6. Angie. Scissors, 1991. Sharon Stone before Basic Instinct, playing a woman traumatized and paranoid, perceiving threat in every shadow. The film uses post-traumatic paranoia as its engine, how a single violent event can rewire perception so that danger becomes constant, even when absent. The intensity of perceived threat is accurate. Trauma does recalibrate the nervous system. What the film does, like most thrillers, is amplify for suspense. Real paranoia is exhausting and repetitive, not cinematic. The film leans into horror aesthetics, which makes the paranoia feel like genre convention rather than pathology. It was marketed as an erotic thriller and mostly forgotten, though Stone's performance suggested she understood something about fear that the script didn't fully support. The film wanted to be repulsion, but settled for being a disposable 90s video rental. Number 5. Chaz Tenenbaum, The Royal Tenenbaums, 2001. Wes Anderson's film is a comedy about a dysfunctional family, but buried inside it is Chaz, a man so consumed by fear of losing his children that he conducts fire drills in the middle of the night, dresses them in matching tracksuits for visibility, and structures his entire life around catastrophe that hasn't happened. This is paranoid personality in microbehavior, hypervigilance, need for control, the belief that disaster is always imminent. Academically, the film succeeds because it shows paranoia as stable trait, not acute episode. Chaz doesn't have a breakdown. He simply lives this way, year after year. The comedic tone is the limitation. Anderson's aesthetics make everything whimsical, even suffering, which softens the claustrophobia Chaz's children must feel. But the portrayal is remarkably accurate. Paranoia as chronic background hum, not theatrical explosion. Ben Stiller played it with a kind of dead-eyed rigidity that made the comedy hurt. And Anderson never explained it, never pathologized it directly. He just let it exist as part of the family's damaged architecture. Number 4. Fred C. Dobbs, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, 1948. Humphrey Bogart plays a drifter who strikes gold in the Mexican mountains and slowly unravels into paranoid suspicion. The film is a masterclass in gradual psychological decay. Dobbs begins rational, then starts doubting his partners, then obsessing over the gold, then hallucinating threats, then fracturing entirely. The academic strength is pacing. Paranoia isn't a switch, it's erosion. The film shows how isolation, greed, and insecurity compound into delusional certainty. What feels slightly allegorical is the moral framing. Dobbs as a cautionary tale about human nature. Real paranoia isn't a moral lesson, it's clinical. But Bogart's performance remains unsettling because he charts the progression without vanity, showing a man whose mind becomes his own trap. Director John Huston shot on location in Mexico under brutal conditions. The heat, the isolation, the physical exhaustion, all of it seeped into the film. Bogart later said it was one of the hardest shoots of his career. And that exhaustion reads on screen as something close to actual unraveling. Number 3. Captain Queeg, The Cane Mutiny, 1954. Humphrey Bogart again, this time as a naval officer whose paranoid rigidity pushes his crew to mutiny. Queeg fixates on stolen strawberries, obsesses over minor procedural errors, suspects conspiracy among his men, and eventually breaks down during a court-martial, clicking steel balls in his hand while insisting he was right about everything. This is textbook paranoid personality disorder. Hypervigilance, inability to trust, need for total control, interpretation of neutral events as hostile. The courtroom scene is taught in some psychology courses as cinematic illustration of paranoid collapse under pressure. What feels theatrical is the breakdown itself. Queeg's unraveling is performed for dramatic effect, which real paranoia rarely is. But the build-up is meticulous. The film shows how paranoid leadership doesn't just damage the leader, it poisons every system around them. Number 2. Abel Turner, Lakeview Terrace, 2008. Samuel L. Jackson plays a LAPD officer who lives next to an interracial couple and begins a campaign of harassment disguised as concern. Abel is rigidly rule-bound, interprets ordinary behavior as threatening, maintains constant vigilance, and reacts to minor stimuli with disproportionate aggression. The film presents paranoid personality through the lens of authority and control, how someone with a badge and a belief system can weaponize suspicion. Academically, it's praised for showing the multi-layered nature of paranoid traits, the rigidity, the distrust, the simmering anger. The limitation is genre. The film is a thriller, which means Abel becomes a threat, not a person. The dramatic structure makes paranoia cinematic, dangerous, escalating, violent, when most paranoid personalities are simply exhausting to be around, not homicidal. Jackson lobbied for the role because he wanted to play someone whose worldview was internally consistent, even if externally destructive. And that's what makes the performance work. Abel isn't crazy, he's certain. And certainty, in the wrong mind, becomes indistinguishable from delusion. And now, number 1. Paul, Land of Plenty, 2004. Wim Wenders directed this portrait of a Vietnam veteran living in Los Angeles, scanning the world for threats that don't exist. Paul drives around in a surveillance van, records conversations, catalogs license plates, collects newspaper clippings about terrorism, and treats every stranger as a potential enemy. His paranoia is presented as post-traumatic and political, shaped by Agent Orange exposure and 9/11 anxiety. But the clinical picture is unmistakable: paranoid personality disorder, constant suspicion, mind reading, social isolation, obsessive evidence gathering. The film is praised for showing how paranoia builds an entire life, not just thoughts, but routines, environments, relationships. Paul doesn't have paranoid episodes, he has a paranoid existence. The complication, academically, is context. The film situates his paranoia within legitimate historical trauma, which risks making it seem justified rather than pathological. And that's the film's deepest insight. Paranoia often wears the costume of vigilance. It mimics preparedness. It feels, to the person experiencing it, like the only rational response to a hostile world. Wenders shot much of it documentary style, with non-actors in real locations. The surveillance footage Paul collects in the film was actual footage Wenders captured on the streets. And that blurring between fiction and reality mirrors the paranoid mind, where the boundary between observation and delusion becomes impossible to locate. Paranoia doesn't arrive as madness. It grows quietly, through doubt, vigilance, isolation, and the slow erosion of trust. Cinema can distort this experience, sometimes turning paranoia into heroism or mystery. But when portrayed honestly, it reveals something far more fragile and human: the struggle to make sense of a world that no longer feels safe or coherent. Thank you for watching.